It was said once upon a time that a squirrel could travel from one end of Ireland to the other without ever touching the ground, as more than 80% of the land was covered by forest. But thousands of years of Irish population growth has reduced the forest to only 11% of the original, replacing it with the landscape we know today of fields, roads, towns and cities. This has pushed the forest wildlife to the last corridors of the wild, the almost 689,000 kilometres of the Irish hedgerow.
Everything that used to live in our woods, because our woods have gone, pretty much everything is finding refuge in our hedgerows. We are very fortunate in this country that we have more of our field boundaries and hedgerows left than in many parts of Europe.
At that time when people were planting hedges, they couldn't go to a nursery and buy their handquicks or whatever. So they went to the remains of the forest edges, the little pockets of forest that were left, and took species from that. And very often those what was left was quite diverse, quite rich in species, and they used that as a foundation for their hedges. So the hedges we have today, any of the old hedges in particular, are direct links back to an older time in Ireland, to a much more diverse time.
Hedges are vital highways for many Irish species, but they are under threat all over Ireland. A Teagasc small survey started in 2014 looked at the quality of 537 hedges, primarily in Cork, Kildare and Wexford. It concluded that 90% of the hedges were classed as poor. A survey in Monaghan in 2021 checked their hedges against previous surveys and showed species decline across flora and fauna. Hedges are threatened first from the lack of maintenance, a skill now practiced by very few people. And secondly, there is the threat that comes from straightforward removal, in many cases legally, to make way for larger fields, for monocrop growing or new building projects.
We've lost so many hedgerows around here through the housing estate building. Industrial sites are horrendous. So you have old, magnificent hedgerows. And what they do is they take a hedgerow out for some reason, whatever, and replace it with trees. And mostly monoculture. But I mean, why take a hedgerow out in the first place? It takes decades for biodiversity to actually be re-established as it was.
But there are some things we can do about it. As shown by Kildare's Celbridge Heritage and River Catchment Association, when they decided they were going to preserve a threatened hedge bordering their community farm when a new industrial development was being built next door.
My fear was that they're going to build a wall there. Rather have a depleted hedgerow than a wall. So, but it was actually very painful to see what was left of the hedgerow. So I got in touch with one of the councillors to look for funding to restore the hedgerow.
The association did manage to obtain some funding from the local property tax through the Climate Innovation Fund. They then decided to set up a series of talks to determine the function of hedges, to better understand their potential importance to the local area, and what best to do with their own depleted hedge.
There is a countrywide bird survey done by Birdwatch Ireland every year, and of the approximately 110 birds that are counted in that survey, 55 would use the hedgerows and 35 would actually nest in them. So they become of vast importance to birds. And of course the birds aren't living on fresh air. The invertebrate insect population, you want to call it, in the hedgerows is feeding them.
We'll take her all off. You know, one of the trees there, gosh, you'd love to see going into a hedge is apple, but you don't see it, crabapple, you don't see it round about that much. You just don't, and very often if it's in a hedge, it's continually clipped. You know, there it is there. You know, it's well worth, I would just say it's well worth incorporating into a hedge.
Yeah.
It really is. great food for the birds, yeah. And that's the thing about crab, you can have it conform to head shape, as in rectangular shaped, and it'll still find space to blossom and bear fruit. I'd put it into a hedge anyway if I was going again, you know, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, who doesn't love the variety of bumblebees? And you know, if you walk by Bramble at this time of year and just see all these wonderful species, and the colours alone, like, you can't knock. But even if you're weren't into it that before, and same with the butterflies as well, and all these things, and it just adds so much. And I think that's how we're going to progress things in this country.
I mean, hedgerows throughout Ireland support about 800 different plant species. And each one of them has an association with legends and customs and association throughout the seasons. You know, how they used them or not used them, or how they were beneficial to what they thought were beneficial to their life, or if they should avoid them.
Well, hedges are very important, but I think it's reasonable to say that they're often overlooked, certainly. And I think they're growing in importance, because now not only do we have a biodiversity crisis, we're very much in the midst of a climate crisis. So more and more what we are seeing in terms of our landscapes and looking at land use, it's how can we enhance any carbon stocks we might have, or what are the carbon pools that exist or sinks that we could enhance in agricultural landscapes.
Research has shown that healthy hedges can sequester large amounts of carbon from their leaves and their rootstock. Our national carbon measure does not account for hedges at all.
And now there's a new resurgence, of course, an awareness of biodiversity, having to live side by side with the farm, and therefore, you know, hedgerows are getting a little bit of good press. They're getting a lot of air time and are being replanted.
But we have to stop seeing hedges as something that just small groups of dedicated people worry about. Hedges are vital for the Irish farm and the environment. Farmers depend on pollinators, such as the majority of our threatened bees, which mainly are solitary and depend on the hedge. Or the 65% of butterflies that use the hedge, many of whom are also under threat. Then there are the bats, hedgehogs and birds that use the long green runs of hedgerows as a highway for moving, feeding and for refuge. For all these reasons, sustaining hedges and preventing their removal is no longer a niche idea, but a vital necessity for our environment. Although we have laws to prevent their removal or protect them, there are not enough staff to police it, nor enough awareness in planning of the importance of the Irish hedge. Now Ireland is in the midst of a national biodiversity crisis, with species everywhere in decline, and the hedges are a huge part of its survival. We need to take care of them, for all our sakes, not just for the committed few. If we are, as a nation, to preserve the existing hedges, they must be maintained regularly. This is to be done by people skilled in the art of hedge laying that was once a competitive sport at agricultural shows. Today is once again left to a dedicated small group of people who still carry out this vital work around the country. And it was to them that Sonia went to get advice on how to revitalise their Celbridge hedgerow.
Yeah, so we're here to look at a hedgerow that needs to be rejuvenated and renewed due to lack of species, really. So what we're trying to do is grow a really diverse hedgerow that has a really high environmental value, conservation value, lots of pollinators. We're hoping that the base of the hedge will be left to grow fairly wild, and that will give good cover for mammals. You've got, you know, urban stoats moving in now and things like that. there's mice and voles and all sorts. Lots of cover, you know.
And Brendan and myself, we visited several months ago just to see the place, and highly impressed by the hedgerow, linear woodland, whatever you want to call it.
Along the road.
Along the road.
Yeah.
The cherry trees, the oaks. Goodness gracious me.
Fantastic.
I thought you might be replicating that down along here, or are you going to stick to an old-fashioned stock-proof thorny hedge?
No. Like, we also were going to have hazel in there.
Yeah.
Like, it'll be a real mixture between a sort of fruit, nut trees, and native Irish trees.
So there'll be mixed species. There'll be backbone of it will be hawthorn because it is a good, strong plant. It grows well in Ireland. It's a native plant. It's also good protection for nesting birds because it's thorny. But we want other species in that provide flowers. Hawthorn provides flowers, but other things like spindle and cherry, hazel, they all provide food in one way or another. It could be berries for the birds. It could be nuts for the mice and mammals in the hedge, shrews and everything else.
Having made the painful decision that for the survival of the hedge it needed to be cut right back and started again, the Hedgeland Association of Ireland and the Celbridge Heritage and River Catchment Association began a journey that would take many years to bring the Celbridge hedge back to a biodiversity-rich habitat that it once represented.
So it's a great project. It's a long-term project, and so much of nature restoration is long-term, and so much of things like hedgerow management are long-term.
I know it looks like a small hedgerow. It's only 160 metres, but I believe that if everybody has even a little hedgerow that they can restore or redo or replant or something, then all of a sudden you have our motorway of hedgerows. There are so many hedgerows which are in dire strait across Ireland, and to have a small impact that even somebody else might just say, oh yeah, okay, they can't be restored, we can do something about it. One falls in love with them, what might turn out to, in the beginning, maybe a necessity, might become, a love for them, or a passion, or never-ending story, like most things.
And so the Celbridge hedge began its journey back to a healthy, active, biodiverse and carbon harvesting hedge, to eventually join all the other interconnected patchwork of hedges that wend their way throughout the countryside of Ireland.